Hello, everyone. We're here for another installment of SBIFF Film Talk. Today, I am joined by Ellie Foumbi, the writer-director of No Traveler Returns, which we had in the festival, I think in 2017, a couple years ago now. And she's also here to talk about her new short film, Home. And she's joining us from Paris. We're really excited to have you here. Ellie, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for inviting me. This is exciting.
Yeah, of course. Let's get into it. So just tell me a bit of background with No Traveler Returns. What was sort of the inception of that project, and what was your idea, and how did that sort of come together? Yeah.
Yeah. It was, I think it started off with a series of things, really. It was the fall of 2017, and we had that terror attack in New York City on the Lower East Side. And then Parkland happened the following January. And I was kind of comparing, these conversations were started about like, why are all these I mean, it had been happening, but like, I really started to think about the people who go out and decide to commit these kinds of crimes and like what their state of mind is, what are they grappling with? And the thing that struck me particularly with the terror attack from the previous fall in 2017 was just when I was all the news footage I was listening to and watching and hearing about this man's life and how he was an immigrant and how he was struggling to adapt to life in the States, and all of the details that they were sharing about him. I just felt like, wow, yeah, I had so much in common with him. And I started to examine like like just like what does it mean to be an American, and how does someone even enter that space, like that mental space. And and then I was also looking at the discrepancy between the school shootings and how that's treated and how this kind of terrorism is treated. And the more I sat with it, the more I wanted to make a reflective film that, I don't know, that opened up a dialogue about what that was. And the more I thought about it, the more Hamlet's to
Mm.
be or not to be soliloquy kind of came to me when he's going back and forth on whether he should kill his uncle. There was such a clear parallel for that in my head. And I thought it was also kind of a universal way to connect audiences to my main character who was about to do something really horrific. And I love the idea of making this very reflective, poetic movie. And I enlisted my DP's help in just scouting and thinking about the city of New York and how it could be another character in the film, and that's
Mm.
kind of how it came together.
Yeah, that's lovely. I love, with the soliloquy, I feel like there's a standout moment, of course, when it's the line about the conscience being, I wish
Yes.
I thought I could remember the whole thing, but basically the conscience being the undoing of that that one's cause, I guess, if
Yeah.
that's your cause. And um yeah, that was a really beautiful moment in the film, I think, as he's in Times Square and he sees a little girl. And yeah, so can you tell us a bit about the Times Square scene? Because also I
Yeah.
would imagine there must have been some, with it being that location, some challenges with filming that, or how did you go about that, and tell us about that scene?
Yeah, I mean, I expected a lot of challenges. I'd never shot in Times Square before, and I didn't even know what the process was going to be like. And but it was actually a lot easier than I thought. Even though there was a lot of police there, they kind of left us alone, and it was interesting because we shot. I think it was the weekend of Valentine's Day, and so
Mm.
there was such happiness, or it was just absolute. The atmosphere was perfect for what we were trying to build. There was so many happy couples, such like a happy energy in the air, and to be shooting this very somber moment for him, the contrast between those two things just fit perfectly in what we were trying to build, and in wanting to give him an outside, sort of force him outside of his bubble, and wanting to
Mm.
give him um wanting to have something that interrupts the this his mindset. And I made a decision to sort of connect the little girl from Times Square to his sister, or his cousin actually, in the movie. And that was kind of how it came about. We were pretty lucky with that.
Yeah, well, and
There's a lot of luck involved in all of these things.
that was great. So the people there are just there, that atmosphere was ready made for
Yeah.
you to go in. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
So, and I remember you saying too that you actually utilized some of your own family members as performers in there. So you actually were
Yeah.
able to use your own, you connected in that way. Can you tell us a bit about that and
Yeah.
working with family, directing family?
Yes. They're not my blood relatives, but I grew up with them, so they are family to me for sure. And I knew that I wanted to tell an African story. I wanted it to be about an African family. And for me, living in New York, it's always been about kind of the melting pot of all these different cultures and languages. I mean, you're walking down the street, you're hearing French, you're hearing Farsi, you're hearing, all kinds of languages. And that was really important to kind of capture in the film. So I wanted a family that could speak their native tongue, but that also spoke French, which is the language I speak and spoke growing up in New York. And so just the idea of trying to do a casting to find people that spoke the same language from the same country, just felt like it was gonna be impossible. And I was visiting them that like couple of weeks before we decided to shoot. And I was telling my uncle, like, I don't know where I'm gonna find, the main character. And my cousin walks in and I'm staring at him and I'm like, oh, he's perfect.
Yeah.
And I literally did like a little test with my phone, and he was so present and so, like just such a natural. And it was nerve-wracking working with them because, I wasn't sure how they were gonna, if they were gonna like freak out when we had the camera in front of them, but it was also really fun. There's just already a level of trust there. So I rehearsed a lot with them and kind of let them improvise the scenes a little bit. And we talked through it a lot. Like we talked through what the story was and how they felt about it. And I think that really helped. And honestly, the day of it, especially my aunt, they were all amazing. They were such naturals and I didn't really have to do that much.
Yeah, I love that dialogue there between the aunt and uncle. I think that the two perspectives of like, oh, America's gone to hell, look at this craziness, and then hey, this kind of I think kind of a timely message in a way that's like, just have faith, basically.
Yes.
Yeah, that was really powerful. And it's interesting to me that happened so early, and then we find out at the end of the film what this young man is contemplating.
Yes.
Yeah, is there anything you can say about that?
I thought it was really important to sort of, because some of the concerns I had early on was I didn't want people to think, oh, here she is trying to depict, an immigrant family or people of color in a negative light. For me, it really was kind of setting up the environment that this young man came from, and that he's getting he's getting the right message at home. It's not about those people, because often even when there are terror attacks, especially when it's people of color, there is this misconception that somehow the family knew or that they were involved, or that and I for me it was really important to show that he comes from a good family, hardworking people who are just trying to eke by, like most people in this country. And that I think most immigrants really come here looking for a better life and are all about working hard and earning their way, kind of like said early on. And that whatever he's going through is very much a product of his own psyche and his own. Also as a young Black man, there are specific challenges that they face in this country that I think this film also starts to touch on. And yeah, so I kind of wanted to interlace all of that at the same time.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like that's a good moment to pivot to talk about home. this film that you did with, tell us a bit of a background with this. How did this project come about? What was your ideas, and set us
Yeah.
up, and yeah, we'll talk about that.
I was supposed to shoot my feature last March, and then obviously COVID happened, and that I ended up sitting at home for a couple of months. And Netflix has started this initiative with Film Independent. It's a Netflix Film Club grant that they're offering to a few Film Independent alumni to create to write and direct a short film. And they reached out to me and asked me if I had a pitch. And since I was home and not doing anything, I thought, well, yeah, there's a lot to say about what's going on in the country right now and where we are. And as I tend to lean towards stories about families, I wanted to talk about a family. I wanted it to be within the context of a family. And I was talking to my producer, Roy Clovis, about kind of brainstorming ideas with him. And he said something that really resonated with me. He told me about an instance where he had gotten lost in this suburban neighborhood. He was driving upstate somewhere. He got lost and he ended up in a neighborhood that was completely lined with American flags, and he was terrified. And I thought, wow, that's really powerful. It says something about where we are right now. What does the flag mean? And just the very different experience that a lot of African Americans have in this country when it comes to, their place here. And that was kind of the seed for this film that really questions like where home is, and how do you exist in a world that is hostile to you. And I wanted to explore that through, through the main character and through this idea of like moving into a new house in a new neighborhood. And it's all the things that we know that's uncomfortable about leaving, your friends and leaving the place that and having to kind of adapt to a new place that isn't super welcoming, or at least that that is unknown. I mean, I think the unknown of the place is where a lot of the fear lies as well. So yeah, and Netflix agreed that it was an interesting enough proposition that they wanted to make it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's incredible that you conceived of and made the whole thing while COVID, which is still going on. That's incredible.
Yes,
And yeah,
unfortunately.
you mentioned too just now that you like to focus on family oriented stories, and that was really the connecting thread I saw of these. Not necessarily just the family aspect, but it seems that both of these films, you have an internal world of the family and the home, and then there's the external world, and that seems to be kind of like the core, I think, core theme of both of these I see coming through. And with home, I liked how in that it almost felt like you pulled from this horror tradition of like Nightmare on Elm Street of parents not believing children. I definitely got that, or
Yes.
not, not meeting them,
Totally.
not being on that level. Yeah, can you and also, like I was saying before we went live, I didn't read the description. I didn't anything. I just was like, home, great, play. And did not realize, pretty soon it's like, oh, this is unsettling. This is very uncomfortable, which was nice. I love having, that's my favorite way to watch films, is knowing nothing about it. But tell me a bit about these horror elements that are incorporated into this story. And yeah, if that was in your mind at all with the idea for it.
Yeah, it definitely was. And I think when I think about, where a lot of the fear comes being a Black person, it's usually from the least expected place, right? When we think back to Ahmaud Arbery, he was killed while jogging in a neighborhood. It was probably something he did every day. He probably jogged on that street every day and never had an issue. And then until one day where danger just comes out of nowhere. So I wanted to explore kind of the mundane things that we do, or the items, or the things that seem just very harmless in our everyday life that we don't necessarily pay attention to, but that are, and I wanted to kind of pull the horror out of those elements. And also obviously the symbolism of a flag was really important, because it has such a heavy, you know, it has such a, yeah, it's so loaded, especially in
Yeah.
this, after what happened on January 6th, especially.
Yeah.
And that was a happy accident. That wasn't, I wrote this short back in October, so it was before any of that stuff happened.
Gosh, wow.
Um, but in the context of what's happened in the last couple of months, it really is so poignant. And yeah, I wanted to explore the horror in that way. It was very much a part of how I conceived the story.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even with No Traveler Returns, when you were saying just a couple of minutes ago about the idea that the family had something to do with it, I've been reading tons of stories coming through about people who just did what they did on the 6th, and
Mhm.
that family members, that there are children having to turn in parent, that it's not the family's poison, there's
Um,
something,
yeah,
yeah, it's not as simple as that. It's not like we're all on the same page. It's brother against brother, and so I think yeah, I mean, I think even that film has a different resonance now, um because of that.
that's true.
Yeah, man, and yeah, home hits hard. It's something that I think that probably any American can watch and feel that unsettledness, because it points out how the mythology of our country and this dream that we grew up believing, a lot of us, that it's not a reality for everyone, at least. And regardless
That's
of
right.
if you're a Black American or a white American, or and etc., I think that there's some sort of resonance in there that you can feel. And
Yeah,
we haven't resolved that yet, to say the least. I think
absolutely.
collectively we're just feeling that and trying to make sense of what that means and what can be done. um
Yeah.
and so, I mean, in this film, in Home, it brings it back to, I think the father character is so interesting, and there's so much to talk about there too, with like just father figures for a lot of us that exude this strength, and you must be tough, and that you even touch on that dynamic of masculinity, where it's like there's these older generations that are like, you just have to be stronger, and then there's the
Mhm.
younger generation that is like, well, is this the way it has to, or it's an interesting contemplation, I
Yeah.
think, in the film. So can you tell us a bit about that and the choices with the father being the military guy and whatnot?
Yeah, I'm so happy you asked about that. It was really at the core of the film for me. That relationship was the relationship that I really was exploring, and that generational gap between how our parents or our grandparents dealt with racism or dealt with adversity versus, how we deal with it, and it's just a completely different world that we're living in. And I think for me, the final scene in particular, I like, I always like to leave my films very open-ended. Some people saw that as a very like a happy ending, and some
Hmm.
people saw that as a very disturbing ending. And, because basically the dad is saying like, this is how it is. You're just gonna have to deal with it. You're gonna have to learn how to live in this world and just deal with these things. And I think it was important for me, even though the dad is very authoritarian, to show that it's coming from a place of love, but also that's what his generation had. That's how they had to be. They didn't
Right.
have the options that we have now. We haven't, they were living in a different time. And so, you can look at it so many different ways in terms of how Jonah, the main character, should take that. In one sense, you do get the feeling that father and son are together in this fight, but on the other end, it's like you said, very, very importantly, like, is this how we should deal with this? Is this how we should handle this? And I think about even the slightly younger generation. I think about those Parkland kids and how they have become such a voice for gun reform, and Greta Thunberg, and how she's become at 16 or 17 become like, this beacon of light for the whole planet. Um, it's I think the younger generation, they're not taking this lying down the way that the older generation did, and people are demanding change. And so I think for me, that relationship sort of like opens up those dialogues about like, about that in particular, how people should.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I've been feeling this way myself with my age group, but I saw something too recently where someone was pointing out that kind of if you were born between 1985 and like 1995, in that gap, it's a really unique time to have come up, because, and I don't know if you feel this way at all, but it's like I kind of feel myself in between these two generations where I
Yeah,
can understand.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's the, I guess millennials, we're millennials, I guess, if that, I feel like there's so much debate around what a millennial is, but in my mind that 10 years is millennials, and I feel myself as I'm smack in the middle of it when I was
Mhm.
born. And it's an interesting conversation because with all, there's been technology, and our ability to interconnect has completely changed so much about us as a society. And we had a unique experience of kind of growing up with that transition. And then like
Mhm.
the Parkland kids and teenagers now, the Gen Zers, they were born into that world, and so they kind of have it's
Yeah.
interesting. So is that, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And do you feel like as the filmmaker, you were kind of negotiating those two generations in your
Yes,
film?
absolutely, because I feel like you said right in the middle of that, and like I think, yeah, it's I think it's important to, in a way, like I wanted to pay respect to the older generation that has, made so many sacrifices, and they've done things that have allowed us to come this far. And at the same time, it's not enough. It's just not. And that's the reason why Jonah sees things the way that he does. And it's not that his father doesn't see them, because he does. It's just that his father has learned to tune it out, and to just, and I think it's important for Jonah not to tune that out. And for me, that was kind of like, I don't know, that was part of the message that I wanted
Mm.
to put out there, but also it is a delicate balance that we have to play, because at the same time, I don't know, it's just a different it I think as a black person living in America, and as an immigrant especially, I do see the value in kind of keeping my head up and working hard no matter what. But I think there are times when you have to speak up and say, wait, this is wrong, and this
Mm.
needs to change,
Yeah.
so I think
Yeah.
there is a balance that needs to be.
So it's like the fine line between accepting to a certain extent, but acknowledging, it's like you can't be overrun by the weight of the tragedy and frustration and all of that. You can't,
Yes,
that'll destroy you, and you can't do anything, if you're
absolutely.
beaten down by it. But at the same time, if you make yourself so strong and so immune to it, then what's, are you changing, is there, it's, yeah, I could
Yeah,
see that as like that you have to tread that line.
yes.
Wow, that's so cool that like all of that we can kind of suss out from home, where it's generational, and it's this, yeah, that's awesome. This has been a really fun conversation.
No, I love that.
um yeah, so tell me then, let's tell me about what you're working on now, because you're working on a feature, and have managed to do all of this creative work
Yeah.
amidst COVID happening. So yeah, tell me a bit about what's next for you.
Thank you. It's a miracle I've managed to stay productive given just everything that's happened, and how
Yeah.
depressing things have been for the world and, society in general. But I have this feature called Our Father the Devil that I've been developing since the fall of 2019, that I took through the Venice Biennale College, and it received funding. It's a psychological thriller that's set in the south of France. It's about an African immigrant who's been living in this small mountain town, and working as the head cook in this retirement home, and she leads a very quiet life, which is kind of upended with the arrival of this African priest whom she recognizes from her past. And the film kind of dives into their relationship, and also really her trauma from the times when she was living in Africa with this man, and it really opens up questions about whether people can change,
Mm.
and and whether it is possible to be redeemed when you've done, horrific things. So I'm really excited to be working on that.
Yeah.
I just finished location scouting with my cinematographer, Tanks Chan, and we are getting ready to shoot in 2 months. So it's really exciting.
Yay, I can't wait to see it hopefully someday soon. Um,
Yes,
and
well.
yeah. Yeah, that's so great. And it's funny because we've done quite a few film talks, and of course it always comes up, how have you been faring during the pandemic? And yeah, a lot of people have just been so overwhelmed by everything that's happening that it's like I have a theory that there's going to be so much creative output once there's a little bit of time and space from all of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun and interesting to talk to people that have been able to use what's going on to be productive and be creative. So that, yeah, that's
Yeah.
really commendable, and that's a theme. I mean, I don't think that creative people are, I think it's really difficult to not be affected by just
Yes.
what's happening around you in any way. Like, you just that what makes you creative as a person also makes you very sensitive to these things, I think. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I have to just point out the fact that, I mean, I think there was some sort of a COVID related depression that was going around for sure for a
Mhm.
couple of months, or maybe is still
Yeah.
going around. I have to give props to my team because I have an incredible group of people that I work with. It's the same DP I worked with on No Traveler. My editor who's editing my feature, Roy, who produced Home, Roy Clovis. Um, I was able to lean on those people, and I think we leaned on each other in these difficult times, and really were able to tap back into our creative sides because we had each other. And I have to give a props to the composer of Home, Fatrine Kreika, who's an incredible musician and really came on, and I think really did a phenomenal job. And yeah, so these are all people I've known for many years, and that I feel really lucky to have had, as like people to lean on in these times. So yeah.
Amazing. I love it. So with that, I always like to wrap up by asking what kind of advice or what wisdom you kind of gleaned from the experience of, I mean, we're talking about two films, so either, or what you learned through the process of making it that you would pass on as advice to someone wanting to do the same thing.
Um, I would say in these times, like, lean on what resources you have, keep it, you know, really just, I don't know, like, make it however you can make it, and don't, I mean, it depends obviously on what you're shooting and what you're shooting it for, but I think it's more important to keep playing and to keep creating than it is to be
Mm.
perfect. And so I know that a lot of filmmakers sometimes they don't want to shoot until they've gotten all of these things in place. And sometimes you have to just shoot with what's available to you, and just create where you are. That's what I would say right now, because the unexpected always happens, when you kind of take a leap of faith and just leave perfection at the door, because it doesn't exist. And just
Right.
create no matter what.
That's great. Yeah, so we'll let you go because I know it's late there in France. Thank you again so much for sharing your films with us, and being here to talk about it. It's been a lot of fun, and best of luck on your feature. Very excited to hear what you're up to and all of that.
Thank you
So
so much.
yeah, of course. Take care.
Thank you for having me, Audrey, and I will definitely let you know about my feature. Bye.
Awesome. Bye-bye.